I can't really say that I know that he's gay. And
The Scandalous Secret. James Cleveland Died With is a story that still shakes the gospel world to this day.
Of gospel music, the late Reverend James Cleveland. The gospel music industry lost its king on February 9th, 1990.
He was the king of gospel, a man whose music brought healing, faith, and hope to millions. But behind that holy image was a secret so heavy, it followed him to the grave. For years, rumors swirled, whispers about forbidden relationships, hidden struggles, and a mysterious illness no one dared to name. When James Cleveland died in 1991, the truth didn't die with him. It only began to speak louder.
They paid to go see James Cleveland, church folk. Well, it was well known that James Cleveland was homosexual.
Long before the rumors and the headlines, James Cleveland was just a young boy from Chicago with a burning love for music and the church. Born in 1931, he grew up in a small house filled with hymns and the sound of piano keys echoing through the walls. His mother took him to church almost every day, and it was there that his destiny began to unfold. James didn't have money for music lessons or fancy instruments, but he had determination. As a young boy, he would sit on the windowsill outside the church and listen to the choir rehearse. He studied every chord, every harmony, every soulful cry that filled the air. Eventually, he began to mimic what he heard, training his voice to capture that same feeling of spirit and power. His big break came when he caught the attention of two gospel legends, Thomas A. Dorsey, often called the father of gospel music, and Roberta Martin, a pioneering choir director. They saw something rare in James, not just talent, but vision. Under their mentorship, he learned how to blend traditional gospel with something deeper, something that could touch both the heart and the soul.
No matter where.
Cleveland's voice wasn't smooth like other singers. It was raspy, raw, and emotional, filled with a kind of pain that made every word feel real. That voice would one day become his trademark, a sound that made people cry, shout, and fall to their knees in worship. By his 20s, he was traveling across the country, working with choirs and helping them find that same powerful blend of sound. Soon, James Cleveland was no longer just a choir member. He was a leader, a teacher, and a musical force. His arrangements and compositions changed the way gospel choirs performed, turning small church choirs into national sensations. From the choir stands of Chicago to the grand stages of America, James Cleveland rose with a purpose. He wasn't just making music, he was building a movement that united faith and art in a way no one had before. And though his crown would later come with controversy, his journey to it was nothing short of divine.
Harris certainly feels this way. When he was 13, Harris was the only boy alto in the choir at Cleveland's Los Angeles church.
By the late 1960s, James Cleveland had become more than a choir director. He was the heartbeat of modern gospel. Every song he touched carried a power that moved both saints and sinners alike. His breakthrough came with the 1963 album Peace Be Still, recorded with the Angelical Choir of the First Baptist Church of Nutley, New Jersey. The album's title track, a slow, emotional masterpiece, was unlike anything gospel music had ever heard before. Cleveland's voice, gravelly yet filled with grace, told stories of struggle, hope, and unshakable faith. It sold hundreds of thousands of copies and became one of the most influential gospel albums in history. With his success came collaborations that elevated his legend even further. When Aretha Franklin, the Queen of Soul, returned to her gospel roots to record her historic Amazing Grace album in 1972, she turned to one man to guide the choir, James Cleveland. The result was one of the best-selling gospel albums of all time. Watching Cleveland and Aretha together was witnessing two worlds meet, his church-bred passion blending with her soulful brilliance. Their connection reminded everyone where the soul truly began in the sanctuary. But Cleveland wasn't content with personal success. He wanted to build something bigger, a legacy that would outlive him. In 1968, he founded the Gospel Music Workshop of America, GMWA, an organization that brought together singers, musicians, and choir directors from all over the country. It became a home for young gospel talents to learn, perform, and grow. Through the GMWA, Cleveland mentored countless future stars' names like Kirk Franklin, Yolanda Adams, and John P. Key, all drew inspiration from his trailblazing spirit. What made James Cleveland truly special was his creativity. He didn't just direct choirs, he redefined what gospel music could sound like. He mixed traditional hymns with R&B rhythms and soul harmonies, creating a new sound that spoke to both the church and the streets. His music became a bridge between the sacred and the everyday, a sound that made people feel seen, healed, and hopeful. This was the golden reign of a gospel genius, a man who changed not just the sound of worship, but the soul of a generation. To the world, James Cleveland was more than a singer. He was a movement. His songs filled churches with power. His choirs made gospel music reach new heights, and his influence shaped generations of singers. From Aretha Franklin to Kirk Franklin, nearly everyone in gospel and soul music felt his touch in one way or another.
But when I tell you he's been good to me.
But while his voice lifted others to glory, his personal life became a shadow he could never escape. Throughout the 70s and 80s, rumors began to circulate quietly in the gospel community. James was never married, and that alone raised questions in a world that expected church leaders to live a certain way. People whispered about his close friendships with young male choir members, some saying his relationships went beyond mentorship. Others defended him, insisting the king of gospel was simply misunderstood as a man of deep love, affection, and care for the people around him. Still, the whispers refused to fade. In private conversations, musicians, pastors, and choir members hinted that something wasn't right. When the AIDS epidemic began to make headlines in the 80s, some began connecting dots even without proof.
Did Reverend James Cleveland really die from AIDS?
Whoa.
There's rumors out there, and I just wondered if
Then came 1991. James Cleveland passed away at just 59 years old. His official cause of death was heart failure, but those who were close to him said there was more to the story. The rumors reignited with even more force. Some said he had been secretly battling AIDS. Others claimed he had unknowingly passed the virus to a young man who later came forward. It became one of the most controversial moments in gospel history, a clash between faith, image, and truth. Yet despite all the talk, one thing remained clear. James Cleveland's musical legacy was untouchable. He built choirs from scratch, trained voices that would echo through generations, and brought gospel to television screens around the world. He even sang, "I Don't Feel No Way Sad."
James Cleveland sung a long time. I don't feel no way sad. Folks were falling out for James Cleveland.
Behind the crown and glory, James Cleveland carried a secret he never publicly addressed, one that forced the gospel world to confront uncomfortable truths about faith and silence. And that silence became his loudest message of all. As James Cleveland's fame grew, so did the rumors that followed him. Behind the music, the awards, and the thunderous applause, there was another story whispered in church corners and gospel circles. A story about the young men who lived with him. To many, these young men were simply choir members or students, taken in by a kind-hearted mentor. Cleveland often opened his home to them, offering food, shelter, and a chance to grow under his guidance. He was seen as a father figure, someone who helped young men escape the streets and find direction through music. For years, that image stayed intact. But to others, there was something different that didn't sit right. People started asking quiet questions. Why were so many of these boys living with him? Why were some of them so protective, so close, so secretive? Yet no one dared to speak too loudly. In the church world, reputation was everything, and James Cleveland's reputation was sacred.
Me and he kissed me, and I pushed him back.
Gospel historian Anthony Heilbutt, in his writings and interviews, later revealed that the gospel industry of that era had a hidden subculture, one where many male singers lived double lives. Behind the robes and the hallelujahs, there existed a world of unspoken truths, love hidden in plain sight, and fear of being condemned by the very church they served. James Cleveland stood at the heart of that quiet tension. To his fans, he was a man of God, a genius who made heaven sound closer. But among those who knew him personally, there was discomfort, not hatred, but confusion. They loved him deeply for what he gave the world, yet struggled with what they couldn't fully understand. Still, nothing was ever proven. There were no public scandals during his lifetime, no arrests, no confessions, only stories, passed from one person to another, growing heavier as time went on. And when he stood in front of the choir, eyes closed and voice trembling with power, all the whispers seemed to fade. But the question never really left it, only hid beneath the music.
Paid to go see James Cleveland, church folk. Well, it was well known that James Cleveland was home.
What was really going on in those homes? Not long after James Cleveland's passing in 1991, the peace that followed his funeral was shattered by a lawsuit that sent shockwaves through the gospel world. A young man named Christopher Harris stepped forward with explosive claims. He said that when he was a teenager, he had been in a relationship with a gospel legend, and that the relationship had left him with HIV. Harris alleged that Cleveland, who was decades older, had knowingly infected him and caused emotional and physical harm. It was a story that no one in the church wanted to hear, but no one could ignore.
That was before he filed suit against Cleveland's estate, alleging 5 years of contact that ended with Harris testing positive for HIV.
When Jet Magazine and other outlets picked up the story, it spread like wildfire. The lawsuit demanded $9 million in damages, and for the first time, the King of Gospel's name appeared not in church programs or record charts, but in scandal headlines. For fans who had grown up worshiping his songs, the news was devastating. For others, it confirmed whispers they had long tried to deny. Inside gospel circles, opinions split sharply. Some believed the young man's story, saying it matched the rumors that had circulated for years. Others called it blasphemy, an attack on a man who could no longer defend himself. Choir members, musicians, and pastors who had worked closely with Cleveland stayed mostly silent, caught between loyalty and disbelief. Eventually, the case never reached trial. Reports said it was settled privately, and the details were sealed. No one truly knew what was said behind closed doors, or what evidence was presented. And just like that, the story faded from headlines, but never from memory. Still, one question continued to echo. How did James Cleveland really die? His official cause of death was listed as heart failure, but many insiders whispered that he had quietly battled AIDS, the very disease mentioned in the lawsuit. The church avoided the topic, choosing to remember his music instead of the mystery surrounding his final days. But in the years that followed, the silence only made the questions louder and the legacy more complicated. And this mostly came from the guys he had helped get into the industry.
helped a lot of young men get in the industry. And with these rumors I'm hearing, it come from guys who say he helped them.
Right.
But
After the lawsuit and the painful rumors that followed James Cleveland's death, something strange happened and the gospel world went completely quiet. There were no open conversations, no interviews, no statements from the powerful voices who had shared the stage with him for decades. Choir directors, singers, and church leaders simply moved on. To many, silence felt safer than speaking. The thought of questioning Cleveland's legacy or even mentioning the lawsuit risked tearing apart the image of the man who had helped build modern gospel music. Behind closed doors, people whispered. Some said the church wanted to protect its reputation more than its truth. Others said they were simply afraid of losing their careers, their congregations, or the respect of their communities. In a world where image and holiness meant everything, acknowledging such a scandal could mean the end of everything they had worked for. Yet the silence revealed something deeper, the complicated relationship between the Black church and queer identity. Many of gospel's greatest artists were rumored to be gay or bisexual, but it was a truth that could never be spoken aloud. The same voices that filled pews with worship were often forced to hide who they really were. The church celebrated their talent, their anointing, and their power, but demanded their silence.
if he was gay and we were friends, I don't think I would reveal it, because I think
James Cleveland became the perfect symbol of that contradiction, a man who carried both divinity and struggle in his voice. His songs spoke of freedom, yet he lived within walls of secrecy. His faith inspired millions, yet his truth was something even the church couldn't face. In the end, the silence cost more than anyone realized. It left generations of gospel artists afraid to live fully, and it blurred the line between worship and denial. The same church that preached forgiveness found it hard to forgive what it refused to understand. James Cleveland's story, even in its pain, forces us to confront that tension between holiness and humanity, between praise and truth. And maybe that's the real legacy he left behind, not just music that lifted spirits, but questions that still demand answers. In early 1991, the gospel world was shaken to its core. The man they called the King of Gospel, James Cleveland, had died at just 59 years old. Churches across America filled with his music, "Peace Be Still," "Lord, Help Me to Hold Out," and countless others echoed through the walls of mourning congregations. For millions, it felt like losing a father, a teacher, a spiritual guide. But as the choirs sang tributes, whispers, once again, filled the background. His death certificate listed heart failure, yet many quietly believed there was more to the story that Cleveland had been battling AIDS, the same illness that carried stigma and silence in the Black church at that time. No one spoke publicly about it, but the rumors spread fast. The disease, the lawsuits, the lifestyle, all the questions he never answered in life now surrounded his death. And then came the battle over his estate. After his passing, his adopted son, Andre Cleveland, and his longtime associate, Jean Irvin, both claimed to be his rightful heir. The dispute became messy, filled with emotional testimonies and legal fights. Some said Andre had been like a real son to James. Others claimed Jean had managed his affairs and deserved control. What should have been a peaceful farewell turned into a bitter struggle that dragged his name back into the headlines. Through all the chaos, one truth stood firm. James Cleveland's music had changed gospel forever. He had built choirs that reached nations, written songs that still fill Sunday mornings, and opened doors for artists who would take gospel to the next level. Yet, even in death, he couldn't escape the tension between glory and secrecy. The world loved his gift, but it never truly knew the man behind it. His story was full of brilliance, pain, and contradictions. a life that gave so much light yet carried shadows that never fully faded. More than 3 decades later, his name still sparks both reverence and debate. But one thing remains certain. No matter the rumors or the secrets, James Cleveland's voice still echoes, reminding us that even flawed souls can create heavenly music.
Tell me about it.
Nearly 3 decades after his passing, James Cleveland's name found its way back into the spotlight, not through scandal, but through song. In 2019, the long-delayed documentary Amazing Grace, featuring Aretha Franklin's legendary 1972 performance, was finally released to the public. And there, standing beside her in full command of the choir, was James Cleveland smiling, directing, and carrying the same magnetic presence that had once ruled the gospel world. For a new generation, it was a revelation. Young viewers who had never heard his name before suddenly wanted to know, who was this man? They saw the brilliance, the authority, the soul that poured out of every note he directed. But as they dug deeper, they also discovered the controversy, the whispers, the lawsuit, and the mystery that surrounded his final years. His story became more than just about music. It became a mirror reflecting the struggles of a hidden era. Older gospel fans saw the film as both healing and haunting. Watching him again reminded them of the days when choirs were packed, robes shined under the stage lights, and gospel music felt like heaven breaking through. But it also reminded them of the silence, the things the church never talked about, the people it lost, and the pain it buried under hymns. In truth, James Cleveland's story isn't only about one man's secret. It's about an entire generation of artists who carried gifts too powerful to ignore and struggles too heavy to share. It's about how silence, stigma, and secrecy shaped not just his life, but the world of gospel itself. The church that celebrated his music also denied the fullness of his humanity, and that contradiction still lingers in gospel culture today. Yet, despite it all, his music continues to live. Every Sunday, choirs still sing his songs, and his arrangements remain the blueprint for gospel performance. Time may have softened the scandal, but it has only strengthened the sound. The King of Gospel left behind his songs, his choirs, and a secret that still sings through time.